Show of hands. How many bass players? How many women? Fight with power. Shut up. How many guitarists? Oh, he won't like that at all. Anyway, as the gentleman just told you, I've forgotten his name, but he's so keen. Geddy will be out in a moment. We'll have a chat for half an hour. You'll get your chance to jump, and then we'll sign some books. How's that sound?
Yay!
One last question. Best Lush album?
Hemisphere. Moving pictures!
Right answer. Well then, would you like to meet my favourite Canadian?
Yay!
Don't tell Neil or Alex I said that, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, Geddy Lee!
I have to make a serious announcement. There will be no dancing. That's all right. Thank you. I love you too. We're sitting.
Yeah, we're old men, we're sitting down. Wow, right. Whoa.
Yeah. It's a theater.
Anyway, so we were, I don't do this. So we were on the way up, and when we weren't falling asleep on the plane, because we're men of a certain age, we were asking, we were talking about the last time you played in Manchester. When was that?
I think it was
5 years ago.
Yeah. See, they remember. I
Shall I
don't.
ask you guys? And
2013.
Shush, I'll beat you.
I think the first time was 77. June of 77.
Anybody at that?
Yep.
These people are insane. So have you had a look at the book yet? Do you like the book?
Yeah!
So let's start with the book. So a couple of years ago, we were somewhere, probably in a bar, and you said to me, I'm going to write a book about basses. And I laughed and said, no, what are you really going to do? How do you feel it's gone? I mean, now it's there, now it's out in the world. Are you happy with it? Do you love it?
Yeah, I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It was a labor of love. Obviously, it became a big passion for me to tell this story, and in a sense, a justification for my insanity at the same time. But you know, when we first started this collecting business with the electric bass, you know, I realized that as I was looking for information on the history of the instrument, and there was really no beautiful book that showed how fantastic these bits of mid-century, you know, art are, really. I mean, they are instruments, but yet in another way they're fine examples of what was going on in the 50s and 60s in terms of sort of commercial art. So I thought there were a lot of nice books about guitars, the 6-string variety. But I just felt like my instrument wasn't sort of done justice. So as my disease set in, and the volume of instruments got larger and larger, I said, I think we have to do something here. So
Tell these people, Geddy, for shame, how many bass guitars you have?
oh, Phil.
Come on.
Okay, so I'm up to about 280 now.
Oh, wow.
See, it wasn't just me.
There are 250 in this book, and they're pretty much all mine. But it's really not about the volume, it's about the variety and the story of the electric bass, which I think is really interesting, and at least it was to me. And as I did more research and as I collected more variety of instruments, I found that the story was quite, you know, it was really a parallel to the development of modern music in a way, but from the bass perspective. So, just to backtrack a bit, what got me going, originally I had no interest in vintage instruments.
That's the thing I think a lot of people don't know. You only started collecting basses a few years ago, didn't you?
Well, yeah, about 8 years ago now.
Yeah. So imagine if you started when you were younger, you'd have about 4,000.
I would have been too big out of the house by now. What happened was in around 2012, we were in rehearsals for Clockwork Angels tour. And I think it was just before the Hall of Fame thing happened. And we were in LA, and some music store approached me about, they wanted a bit of Rush gear, and they were willing to swap a vintage Fender precision bass, like from 1953. And in those days, all I cared really about were instruments that were tools for me to develop my sound. I only had as many instruments I felt were useful in creating my musical identity. So I wasn't a collector of these things, so I thought, well, what am I going to do with an old bass? I'll never use it. But it had planted a seed, so I looked the bass up, and then I started reading about the early years of electric guitar and bass, and I realized I knew so little about the instrument that I'd held in my hands for over 40 years.
Yeah.
And so the more I read, the more curious I got, and as I say in the book, when I get curious about something, it's kind of dangerous.
It is bad. He has a room in his house which is just all baseballs. I mean, generally it's all baseballs. And
they don't know what baseballs are.
Yeah,
it's an American thing.
We have the internet here now, for
God's
God's sake.
Okay.
Just go back to the bass a second. One of my favorites is that one of your favorite basses, though, you bought in Kalamazoo in a pawn shop.
In a pawn shop.
Yeah.
Tell
us about that.
Okay, well, so I had a day off in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and
never go there.
No, we were playing lovely Wing Stadium in Kalamazoo, and my tech at the time, Skip Gildersleeve, he used to go on days off. He used to go pawn shopping. So,
Not what you think. Then again, it was Skip. It is what you think.
And he would look for old instruments. So I didn't do that as a rule, but I was fairly bored that day, and so I went along with him. And I walked into the shop, and there was a jazz bass, a black jazz bass, hanging on the wall. The guy wanted $200 or $250, can't remember exactly, but no case.
Yeah.
And I said, I never had a jazz bass. I'd never even played a jazz bass before. So I bought it for fun, and I hung around, the shop for a bit, trying other instruments. But I kept that bass for quite a while without actually ever using it. I think the first time I used it was on the Moving Pictures album, on the song Tom Sawyer, and which many people think is my Rickenbacker, but fooled you.
Was it because you said you couldn't get the sound you wanted on Tom Sawyer, so you picked up the Fender Jazz, and that was the genesis of that moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tom Sawyer was one of those songs when we were recording that was difficult from the get-go. Alex had a hard time getting the solo that he liked, getting the sound for the solo. We had a lot of problems with the recording desk. It kept breaking down. It was like one of those songs that wasn't meant to be, yet it sort of conquered, and it is to be. So it was to be. Anyway, that was the first time I used it on record, I think. And I think I also might have used it on Vital Signs, but I can't recall because I'm old.
It's a long time ago, Geddy.
Long time ago, yeah. Anyway, so when this guy offered me this 53P bass, I said, finally I relented. I gave him something, from like the collecting dust part of the stage. And I had this bass. And then I said to my tech, Scully, I said, wouldn't it be cool to have a bass that represented all of my heroes? Like an EB3 like Jack Bruce used to play, or a Hofner like Paul McCartney played, or an old 4001S like the great Chris Squire played. Most of these guys, may they rest in peace. So, that's how it started, just a modest collection. And before I knew it, it was spilling over in my studio, and I was finding all these bits of historical information. I was finding all these nuances about the instruments themselves. But I was also gathering stories about the people that played those basses before me. not a lot of them were famous players, but they were what I call weekend warriors, or real people, normal people that loved music, loved playing, and so they would do their day job or whatever and get the rocks off on the weekends or once a week at pub night or something. And so a lot of them were instruments owned by one person for over 50 years. And when you looked at these instruments, they showed how much they were loved and how well they were used.
Yeah.
And there's sort of two kinds of collecting. You know, there's the people that want the pristine, what we call case queens. Different meaning than you're thinking, but
Like bone shop, two meanings.
and they're the road warriors. So I thought part of the point of this book was to show not only the evolution of my instrument, but also the collecting madness and the two different types of instruments that people collect. You know, the pristine ones and then the ones that really, in my view, have a lot of mojo. So that's sort of how the whole project got going, and then 2 years later, voila.
Ding. Fall on your foot, you'll know about it. Well, your first guitar was actually a guitar, wasn't it? It wasn't a bass, it was a guitar.
Yeah,
Palm sleeves on.
like many bass players, I started as a guitar player.
Yeah, take that home with you. Yeah.
In Canada, we say nobody wants to be a bass player, just like nobody wants to be a goalie. You get told you're the bass player. So that's how it happened with me. I was playing in a little band, sort of. And we weren't yet at the garage band stage. We were at the in some guy's bedroom stage. And the bass player in the band, his parents thought we were bad influence, so he was not allowed to hang around us. So they had a quick vote, and boom, I was elected as the bass player.
When did you get your first bass then?
Now you're stretching me. I guess I was about 15.
Yeah.
And I begged my mother to loan me the $30 or $35 I needed to buy this Kanora Japanese-made bass, which I bought. And one of the first songs I learned was a song called 2120 South Michigan Avenue by the Rolling Stones, a Bill Wyman part. And if you could play that in my neighborhood, then you were cool.
You were king of the world.
Yeah, yeah. And so when it came to do interviews for my book, one of the people I really wanted to talk to was Bill Wyman.
Bill, yeah, of course.
Not only because he was one of the first, influences for me, but also because he's sort of living history of rock and roll. And he could talk about what it was like in the late 50s, early 60s if you were looking to buy an instrument. What were the music stores like, and such a fascinating cat. And I really had such a great time talking to him, but it was very hard to keep him on track.
Yeah.
He's so interesting. He's written like 9 books, and he's a butterfly photographer. He's an amateur archaeologist. He invented his own metal detector. Yeah, because he said, like he does with basses, he says, well, you see, I've got very small hands.
Also, this is Geddy's English accent. It's more qualifying. When we was in person in the UK, this is the accent. You probably know the song Can the Eye on Moving Pictures? Yeah. It's a bit in the middle of that where somebody goes, hello, Gav. Ladies and gentlemen, there it is.
It's not true.
It is.
It's not true. Anyway, so he was the first interview I did for this book. And,
Was he the first? I didn't know.
yeah, and so I was a little nervous. I'd never been on the other side of the table, so to speak, and he was being very difficult. He didn't want to talk about basses. He wanted to talk about throwing a hat trick at the Oval, right? He's the only musician ever did that. He wanted to talk about that. Anyway, we finally got around to enough about basses, and it was really a great experience for me, and it set me off interviewing some of these other chaps.
I was going to say, because obviously that was when you first started, and you said to me you were going to start doing interviews and stuff. I mean, I think you obviously started enjoying it, but I mean, John Paul Jones came to his house. I mean, come on. Unbelievable. That was at my house. He's not allowed me in my house. But I mean, what was that like doing interviews? I mean, was that fun for you eventually, or was it hard work, or was it?
It was really fun. I really loved it. Being in Rush, we were pretty much a microcosm. We were so like a small island amongst ourselves. And so it was great to get out and talk to different musicians and learn more about their backgrounds. And to be on the other side of the table, so to speak, was really revealing and quite a rich experience for me.
Yeah.
And they were all such great people. I mean, John is a fantastic, lovely, lovely man. He wouldn't even let me pay for his taxi.
Wow.
That's a
Jimmy Page would have made you pay for his taxes. And he would have wanted sandwiches.
So no, they were all great people. Some of them were people I knew, like Les Claypool and Rob Trujillo, and others were just really interesting. But I didn't want to just pick famous bass players, because it wasn't. The book isn't really just about playing the bass, it's about collecting. And so there are a couple of lesser known characters that I interview that talk about really interesting aspects of what it's like to be a mad collector.
Yeah.
I found that was another way of sort of enlightening the subject.
So we talked, I'm lucky enough to come into your studio, and the last time I was there, you had a bass that was hanging up, and it was new, it just made it into the book, I think, and it was the La Studio. Because the studio, I'm sure you know, was where Permanent Waves was made,
Right.
Pictures was made, I think, wasn't it?
That's
So a whole slew of very successful albums. And can you tell that story? Because I love it. You told me that story. I got it. I did, and I'm a hard guy. I was quite fun.
Tough egg. Yeah, that was a very sweet thing. The people that now own the studio, or what's left of it, the studio burned down. We did a number of records there, as most of you guys might know. And some of our biggest records there. But the studio is there was a fire and it burned down, but the door to the sound room survived the fire. And this chap sent a bunch of the wood from that door to Fender and to the custom shop, and they fashioned both of them into a bass for me, a guitar for Alex, and drumsticks for Neil.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really quite
It's so cool. It's so cool.
Some of the wood has little scribbles that you make while you're waiting for the tape. Pissed off.
On the headstock, it's got the studio kind of imprint into the
Yeah,
thing.
they burned in the logo for the studio. So, I mean, that's a modern piece, but there's a lot of love in that piece, so I really appreciate it.
And you just talk about instruments that have history, that has got so much history in a way, do you know what I mean? Because it's
A different kind,
Yeah,
certainly.
yeah,
Certainly
absolutely.
Rush history,
Yeah.
where so many of the other instruments are survivors of decades and decades. And that, to me, that's what's so interesting, like when you look back at a Fender from the early 50s and you think about, well, what did Fender really do? Well, he sort of created a kind of mass production. It was really the first commercially available electric bass. In 1951, he came out with this precision bass, and just imagine what it must have seemed like to these guys that were playing double basses in bands, traveling around the country, schlepping this big thing with them, having to tie it on the roof because it didn't fit into most of the vehicles of the day. And suddenly here's this thing that has frets in it, which meant it was actually tuned. You could tune it very precisely, hence the name. And also the portability.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about all those things and then tracing the evolution, because I'm a bit of a nut for understanding the thing. And one of the things...
So a bit of the nut is an understatement, just when it comes to things.
So, when it came to my instrument that I was playing at that moment, which was the jazz bass, I wanted to understand how it had evolved, for example, from the first jazz bass in 1960 to the one I was holding. Like, how did it get from there to here? So I just set out to get one from every year and play them back to back to back to back with my tech Scully, and we would analyze the pickups and analyze the neck, and it was really...
Days must have flown by.
The months went by, and the dollars went out the window.
We aged, autumn came.
I learned a hell of a lot
Yeah.
about the thing that, that I loved, the thing that I was working with, and it introduced me from there to other different brands, some of which that I had never really considered using, like, for example, Gibson Thunderbird. I'd never played a Thunderbird, although I had some pals like Pete Way and Pete Over and Watts, who played for
Yeah.
the Hoople.
Wonderful.
And I used to think, wow, what odd, really weird-looking instruments those are. And they sound kind of weird. I remember talking to Pete and asking him, Pete, how do you describe yourself?
You can do your
This is my Pete White. He said, Glee. Call me Glee. Well, Glee, see, my sound is 3/4 good and 1/4 not very nice.
I knew that was coming.
So, I never imagined I would use that instrument because I watched Pete play it so many times, and I even watched him fall off the stage one day, more than one time. But now I'm in love with them because because I don't have the pressure of the context of my own sound. I can appreciate them more for what they are.
Oh, they are.
And even on the last tour, I decided that I was going to take 27 of these instruments out, and I was going to try to get one in every song and see how they would work in the context of Rush. And
That was. Can I say? If any of you were lucky enough to be on the R40 tour, and it was quite magnificent. But every time you looked at Geddy, he changed bass. And I know Scully, your tech, and he's not what I call a happy man. In any way, shape, or form. Hi, Phil. Hello, Scully. How are you? How did he get to that?
he was very busy.
Yeah.
Very busy. I think he loved it, frankly, even though he was working really, really hard. But it was really quite interesting. But I tried this this Thunderbird that Pete had used all those years, and a number of other great players like Martin Turner from Wishbone Ash. He was a Thunderbird guy. And I tried it in the song Animate, and I was really surprised that it worked really well. And one extra bonus was, my sound is usually pretty bright. It's got a lot of guitarishness in it. And it always is difficult to mix Rush because my sound has a lot of top end. Alex's, obviously, guitar has a lot of top end, and Neil plays a lot of those cymbally things. And there's a real argument going on in the mid-range. So it's a bit of a fight to get the mix just right. But when I used this Thunderbird in that particular song, I realized I can have it quite loud, but because it didn't have that kind of top end, it didn't get in the way.
Okay.
So I traded off top end for volume, which is always good for this.
What do Alex and Neil, God bless them, what do they think of the book? Have you got feedback? Especially Neil, who is, of course, a writer as well.
No, who cares?
These people might get in, you are.
They've been amazingly supportive, of course. Neil thinks it's an incredibly extravagant book. He loves that I did it. And Alex was kind of blown away when I gave him a copy of it. He sat up till 3 in the morning reading it. He couldn't put it down. I was like, how high were you? Reading about the bass. Anyway, he's been lovely and very supportive, and I'm really lucky to have these guys as my friends still, because we just are very close and always will be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of obviously the book here, this is a strange and hard question for you, I'm sure, but if you had to take one bass away to the desert island, what bass would it be?
Man, that's so hard, because I love so many different ones for different reasons, but I think if I could only have one, it would have to be my 62 foam ring jazz bass, because it just is my new favorite thing to play.
It's such a nice colour as well.
Yeah, but
that's the kind of guy I am, yeah.
I know you're all about looks, Phil Bonnie, but it's such a great bass to play, and if you can only have one bass, it better be the one that plays your favorite, right?
Well, let's talk about that bass, because you ended up playing with Yes, at the Rock and Roll thing. You played that bass, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
You played Thunderbird.
I did.
How did that go for you?
That was really fun. It was scary at first, because that's not exactly the easiest bass song.
Yeah.
And Chris Squire was such a massive, I was such a fan of his. really an icon to me, an inspiration. And I thought it was so tragic that Yes had taken so long to get Yes in the Hall of Fame, and he wasn't around to see it. And I got word that the band really wanted me to,
Do that about
play that song.
the show you off song.
Yeah, so it was a thrill because Roundabout may be one of the great bass songs ever
Yeah.
written, and
Yeah.
bass-driven songs. So I really practiced a lot.
Can we just go to one of your other loves, baseball? You've seen it on the internet, I know. Talking about nerves, your team, of course, is Toronto, the Blue Jays,
Yes.
who were awful this season. But you threw out the first ball, didn't you? Talking about this obsessive kind of practicing thing. How long did you practice before you went out onto the pitch and threw the first ball?
Well, I threw for a solid hour before I threw out the first pitch. And I brought my glove with me because I was practicing. And usually when someone throws out the first pitch, they're standing in front of the mound and they just throw it out. But I had my glove, I was prepared. And I threw a perfect strike. And it was like, that's it. It's like it was a drop the mic moment. It's like, I'm done. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. No, it was really fun. It was really a big thrill.
Because that's I know I've been to baseball with you, and it's something you absolutely adore. While I sit there going, what's happening now? Did you win this one? You always go, no.
No, you know more than you pretending to know.
I just
No, it's a great game, and anyway, they didn't come here to listen to.
He's not baseball, look at that, to a man and a woman. So let's talk a bit about music, because I'm sure you want to hear about that. I'm sure another space place here as well. My favourite Headache, great solo album.
Thank you.
I like Victor too. Don't tell Alex, but I thought it was
I
good.
won't tell them.
But musically, what's going to happen with Mike? Is it going to be My Favourite Headache Part 2? Part 2?
I couldn't say at this point. Right now, I'm shamelessly promoting my book.
Yes.
So I cannot do that anymore, and then
You can do
I'll
both.
figure it out. No, I can't.
So let's talk a bit about because obviously the photography in the book is a guy called Richard Sebald, who I met on our 40. If you've never met Richard, and it seems unlikely he lives in Vegas, he basically looks like the side of a house with a suntan. No, seriously, you go, man, he does? That's weird. And look, so many teeth. But great guy. But his photography is exceptional. I remember once we were looking at the sheets of this book, and there was a shot of some bass strings, and I was like, oh my god, that's beautiful. Richard's made bass strings beautiful.
Yeah.
Tell me about working with Richard on the book.
Well, it was really great fun. I had worked with him in the context of Rush. He had shot the band a number of times and me for some magazine stuff, but he comes from a really diverse background. He'd been a product photographer, he'd been a portrait photographer, he'd worked with this well-known Canadian photographer, Edward Bertinsky. He'd worked learning how to do prints with him. And really an incredibly diverse background. And we did some test shots about a year before we ever started the book.
Okay.
And I had a lot of confidence he'd be able to do it. And so my wife, unknowingly, volunteered her art studio, which is on the 3rd floor of my house, to be our photo studio. And so Richard went up there and basically disassembled her room and built 4 different areas for shooting instruments and hung around there for about 4 months. No, 8 months, more like 8 months, sorry. So eventually I was getting this, Haven't you finished yet? So 30,000 photographs later.
Is that how many it was? Wow, my god.
That's how many we started with before we whittled it down to a mere 1,100 that are in the book.
Wow, is that 1,100?
Something like that.
I haven't counted, I'll be honest.
Me neither.
No, but I'd say there's something about Richard's photography you can, he's a good life photographer. When he does the so still work, it's absolutely magnificent, isn't it?
Yeah, he's enormously talented. And I also worked on this book with a dear friend of mine, Daniel Richler, who has been a very successful broadcaster in Canada for many years, and he's written a novel of his own and many magazine articles. And he was the guy whose job it was to help me wrestle with words and try to get my sense of personality across in the book, because I really wanted this book to be a conversation, sort of like what we're doing now, just talking about basses and talking about music and talking about my past, and trying to tie them all together. So he was invaluable in that regard, and he lives in Britain now. So we were back and forth across the water, which was a great excuse to come over here quite often.
Yeah. And he's got a good haircut too.
He's got a haircut a lot like yours.
It's a lot like mine,
Is that why you're
yeah.
saying that?
Geddy's friends only have haircuts like this, so think on. What was the most gratifying thing about the book? Was it finishing it? Was there one moment, because I like novels, you may not know that, but there's usually a moment in the book where I kind of know I've got something, that I have something. Was there a kind of eureka moment with this?
No, not really. I didn't, I knew it would be beautiful if I pushed hard enough and worked at it long enough. But it was a lot of work, and it was quite an interesting learning experience for me. At one point, when we first sent the manuscript into our editor, she said 3 things to me. She said, number 1, I've never received a manuscript that was 845 pages before. Whoa. Number 2, I love the way your passion for the instruments play out on the page. And number 3, which made me most happy, is I didn't expect it to be funny. So that was a nice thing for her to say. And, but taking it from so many pages down to a mere 408 was really an education. And I literally at one point moved into the offices of HarperCollins in New York and spent 2 weeks with the staff, learning how to edit down a book. So it was good fun for me. It was really, new projects, new interests are so good for your brain and so good for your personality. So I really enjoyed that.
And I was going to say, I'm going to mention the R word, Lush. When that all finished, when you knew it had finished, because I know for a while we talked and you were saying, there was possibly something was going to happen, and then eventually it was the acceptance of half. It wasn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. Was it important that you did this book then? Was it that you were like, I need to kind of move on to something else, a bit of closure, but something new, something beyond Lush? Was that important?
I think it was very convenient. Because, I won't lie, it was a difficult transition for me at first, because when the tour ended, I was still raring to go, and I was very proud of the show, and I was
it was a great show.
A little unhappy I couldn't bring that show to Europe and the rest of the world. I'm sorry about that.
Madam, please,
I did my best. But it wasn't meant to be, and of course we did hold out hope that perhaps after a short time off, maybe
you come back.
Minds would change and we would be able to mount a tour elsewhere, but it didn't happen. So that's life, and that's fine. And so this came along at a good time for me. So because of being obsessive, it absorbed me. And kept me off the street, so to speak.
Yeah. How long did it actually take? Was it 2 years?
It's about 2 years, yeah.
That's a fairly long time. I just said I might take about 3, but still.
Right.
But I mean, did you plan for it to be that long, or was it just this will be done when it's done? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I was really pushing to have it done quickly because I didn't want to, take up so much time. But it just, the book finds a pace of its own.
Yeah.
Every project you do finds a pace of its own, and like in Rush, when we finish a mix, it's never really finished for me, and they literally have to drag it out of my hands because I could fiddle with it forever. This one was a little bit like that, but at the end of a mix, I'm always looking at its flaws, and all I can hear are the things I didn't do the way I wanted to do them. But strangely, when I finished this, I was really pleased with it. So, so I'm quite happy that people are responding to it, and I'm quite proud to bring it around the world and have an excuse to talk to you folks.
Yes,
that's kind of a good thing.
Was there any point in the book where you thought this is hard? I thought was there a block? Did you have a moment where you thought this isn't working where I want it to work? Because I know that happens in albums a lot as well, isn't it? You kind of sometimes hit a joint and you're like, this is not moving the way I wanted to do. Or was it quite an easy job? Did it flow?
I didn't really. I just felt a little overwhelmed at a certain point.
That's 1,100. How many photos?
Sorry?
How many photos did you take?
1,100 photos, but I wanted to do justice to the history of these various brands. Mm-hmm. Getting the facts right was really difficult.
Yeah.
Because there's so much misinformation, which also underscored the need for a book like this to me, because there was no one compendium about the electric bass and its beginnings and all the various brands. So the more frustrating it was in terms of finding information, the more I felt determined that this book would be a good reference book for some people.
What's the next book going to be about?
It's a really small, slippery book of synthesizers.
You're a pamphlet on bass pedals. This is one I bought in
All it would be
London.
is a pamphlet.
Hold on, let me check the time. Where's Meg?
I think we should hear from these folks.
Yeah, should we head to Q&A now? I think I've talked enough. So I can't even see the